Hello, my name is Lucienne Carter, 37 years old. I live in Seattle, where the drizzle and the city lights seem to always conceal stories of sorrow. I am a real estate entrepreneur who built everything from scratch after leaving behind a past full of pain. To tell you how I became the person I am today, I must take you back to Franklin, Pennsylvania. The place where I grew up, where the memories of a childhood, both sweet and bitter, still haunt me every night. Franklin in the 1980s was a small town with tree-lined streets and cozy wooden houses. My family lived in an old mansion where the walls seemed to be steeped in my mother, Eleanor's laughter and love. My mother was my light, a woman with a gentle smile and hands always ready to embrace me. She taught me how to fold paper cranes, how to watch the sunset, and to believe that this world, though sometimes harsh, is still full of wonders. I remember afternoons sitting with her in the kitchen, filled with the aroma of freshly baked cookies, as she told me fairy tales or sang lullabies that I still know by heart to this day. My father, James Carter, was a successful real estate businessman who founded Carter Enterprises. He was often away, but whenever he returned, he always brought small gifts for me, a toy car, a picture book, or simply a strong hug that made me feel like the center of the world. But that light was extinguished when I was 8 years old. My mother was diagnosed with breast cancer, and that cruel disease took her away in just 1 year. I still remember the day she lay in the hospital bed, her eyes fading, but still trying to smile at me. Lucian, you have to be strong, okay? I'll always be here in your heart. Those were the last words she said to me before closing her eyes forever. My mother's funeral is a hazy memory, as if I was standing there, but my mind was drifting elsewhere. I only remember the sound of people crying, the patter of rain on umbrellas, and the emptiness that felt like the whole world had collapsed. My father, a man who was always tough, hugged me tightly that day. I didn't know it would also be the last time I felt closeness from him. After my mother's death, my father changed. He threw himself into work as a way to escape the pain, leaving me in that vast house with its cold walls. I began to feel like a shadow, silently passing through the hallways, trying to find a bit of warmth in my mother's keepsakes. The scarf she once knitted, the diary she left behind, or the paper cranes we folded together. Then when I was 10, my father brought Vivian home. Vivian was a tall, slender woman with meticulously styled blonde hair and eyes as sharp as knives. She entered our home with her 2 children, Chloe and Elias, like uninvited guests. My father introduced Vivian as my new mother, but from the very first moment, I knew she could never replace my mother. Vivian brought a strange atmosphere, as the house already gloomy after my mother's death now felt even more oppressive. She quickly took over every space, from rearranging the living room furniture to deciding the dinner menu. My father, seemingly captivated by her charm, didn't notice that I was gradually being pushed out of the family's center. Chloe, 2 years older than me, was a haughty girl with a fake smile. Elias, a year younger, was aggressive and loved picking fights. From the very first days, they made me feel like I didn't belong. Chloe often mocked me, calling me the orphan when my father and Vivian weren't around. Elias liked to push me down or hide my toys, laughing gleefully whenever I got angry. Vivian not only condoned, but also encouraged Chloe and Elias's behavior. She often spoke harsh words as if my existence was a burden. "Lucian, why can't you be like Chloe and Elias? They're so much better behaved than you," she said, her tone sweet but laced with malice. Once I overheard her telling my father that I was the extra child, that I made him remember my mother, a memory she wanted to erase. I tried to tell my father what was happening, but he just waved it off, saying I needed to adjust to the new family. "Vivian is a good person, Lucian. Need to give her time," he said, his eyes weary. I didn't entirely blame him. He was trying to rebuild his life, trying to fill the void my mother left. But every time he dismissed my words, I felt like I was losing a bit of his love. The years that followed were a long chain of pain. At school, I became withdrawn and quiet. My classmates started calling me the weird kid because I often sat alone drawing paper cranes or scribbling in my mother's old notebook. At home, I tried to avoid Vivian and her children, but they always found ways to hurt me. Once, when I was 12, Elis tore apart a paper crane that my mother and I had folded together. I lunged at him, tears streaming from anger and pain. Vivian appeared at that moment, not bothering to ask what happened, and slapped me hard across the face. "How dare you hit my son, you ill-mannered brat?" she screamed, pulling Elias into her arms as if he were the victim. My father, when he heard the story, only sighed and told me to apologize. I didn't apologize. Instead, I ran to my room, locked the door, and cried until I had no tears left. Those hurts piled up like invisible scars I carried throughout my childhood. I began to dream of a day when I could leave Franklin, leave Vivian, Chloe, and Elias behind. I imagined going somewhere far away, where no one knew who I was, where I could start over. But back then, I was just a 12-year-old boy with no money, no power, only paper cranes, and memories of my mother to hold on to. One night, when I was 13, I found my mother's diary in an old box under my bed. Her handwritten words were like a beam of light piercing through the darkness. She wrote about me, about her love for me, and her hope that I would grow up to be a strong, kind man. "My Lucian, you are my most precious gift. Never let anyone make you doubt your worth," she wrote. I read those words over and over as if they were a protective charm. The diary became my refuge, where I poured out my anger, my loneliness, and my dreams of freedom. I promised my mother and myself that one day I would leave this place. I wouldn't let Vivian or anyone else define me. My final years of middle school passed in silence and endurance. I excelled in school not to please my father or Vivian, but because I knew education was my only way out. Spent hours in the library reading everything I could. From my father's business books to my mother's adventure novels. I dreamed of the future where I could stand on my own 2 feet, where I wouldn't have to bow to anyone. When I was 16, my father began talking about me taking over Carter Enterprises. One day he called me into his office, where portraits of generations of Carters hung on the walls, and spoke about the family legacy. "Lucien, you're the heir. This company will be yours," he said, his voice full of pride. But I didn't feel proud. I felt pressure, and part of me wondered if he truly wanted me to take over, or was just trying to make up for the years he'd neglected me. Vivian, of course, wasn't pleased with the idea. I overheard her telling my father that I was not mature enough to run the company, that Elias was the one with leadership qualities. Elias, a 15-year-old who only knew how to bully others, was a leader in her eyes. The weeks that followed were a cold war in the house. Vivian's subtle manipulations became more blatant. She began to undermine me at every turn. If I spoke in a meeting with my father and his associates, she would find a way to interrupt me or cast doubt on my words. "Oh, Lucian is so young. He doesn't understand the market complexities yet," she'd say with that sweet, poisonous smile. Elias, now sensing his mother's increasing power, became bolder. He would steal my notes, deface my textbooks, and once he even broke the glass of the framed family photo of my mother and me that I kept on my nightstand. The shards of glass on the floor felt like a final blow. I went to my father, the broken frame in my hands, but he just sighed. "Boys will be boys, Lucian," he said, not even looking at me. "Your mother's picture is just an old memory. Focus on the future." That was the moment something inside me broke. It wasn't the broken glass or Elias's cruel laugh. It was my father's apathy. He wasn't the man who had taught me to be strong, to stand up for myself. He was a man lost, a hollow shell manipulated by a woman who wanted to erase every trace of his past. That night, I made a new entry in my mother's diary. "I am leaving. This house is no longer a home. My father is gone, and I am a stranger here. I will not let them win. I will build my own legacy." A few months later, I was 18, and the tension in the house was a suffocating blanket. One evening, my father called me into his study. The room was dark, lit only by a single desk lamp. He looked tired, his face etched with more lines than I remembered. He didn't meet my gaze directly. "Lucian," he began, his voice hoarse. "Vivian and I have talked. With your temperament, we feel that Elias is better suited to take over Carter Enterprises. He has a stronger personality." The words hit me like a physical punch. It wasn't just the company. It was the final rejection. He was choosing them, his new family, over me. I stood there, silent, the betrayal, a cold weight in my chest. He avoided my eyes as he continued, however. I have set up a trust fund for you. It's a modest sum, but it should be enough for you to get by. He slid a small sealed envelope across the desk. I didn't touch it. I just looked at him, searching for a trace of the man I once knew. There was none, only wariness and guilt. I've made my decision, he said, as if to end the conversation. I turned and walked out of the room, out of the house, and out of Franklin. I didn't take the envelope, I didn't say goodbye, and I never looked back. I had saved enough from odd jobs over the years and had one priceless possession, my mother's diary. I hitchhiked and took buses all the way to Seattle, a city that felt as far away from Pennsylvania as another world. I found a tiny apartment, a shoebox-sized space with a window that looked out onto a wall. I worked multiple jobs, waiting tables, construction, anything to keep a roof over my head. My days were spent toiling, and my nights were spent reading. My father's old business books, the ones I had secretly taken from his library, and my mother's diary, which had become my anchor. I learned everything I could about real estate, but my approach was different. While my father built a business on legacy and tradition, I would build mine on integrity and innovation. Slowly, painfully, I began to succeed. I bought my first dilapidated house, renovated it with my own hands, and sold it for a small profit. I reinvested every cent. The profits grew, and my company, Carter and Sons, a name I chose to honor my real family, grew with it. I never used my father's name in my professional life. It was a past I had left behind. My success was a quiet vengeance, a testament to what a boy without an inheritance could achieve. By the time I was 37, I had a thriving real estate empire. In Seattle, I had a beautiful home, a successful company, and a life I had built from nothing. But I still carried the paper cranes in my wallet and my mother's diary in a fireproof safe. The scars from my childhood had faded, but they had never fully healed. I hadn't spoken to my father in 19 years. I had received a few Christmas cards from his new family in the early years, but I had thrown them away unopened. I had blocked their numbers and deleted their email addresses. Franklin was a ghost town in my memory, a place I had escaped. Then, a week ago, a call came from an unfamiliar number. It was Vivian's lawyer, a man I didn't know. "Mr. Carter," he said. "I'm calling on behalf of Vivian and the estate of James. Carter, I regret to inform you that your father passed away last week." My heart stopped. It was a strange mix of emotions. Grief for a man I had lost a long time ago, but also a raw, painful finality. The lawyer's voice was sterile as he informed me of the funeral arrangements. "Vivian and the family will be hosting a private service. We understand it's a difficult time," he said, a note of detached condescension in his tone. I hung up without a word. I flew to Franklin. The town looked the same, but smaller. My father's mansion, the place I had once called home, looked grand and imposing from a distance. The funeral was held in the large church hall. It was a cold, somber affair. Dressed in a sleek black suit, stood with Chloe and Elias by her side, receiving condolences from family friends. Her face was a mask of practiced sorrow, but her eyes, those sharp knives, glinted with a strange mix of triumph and suspicion when they landed on me. I approached the open casket. My father lay there, his face peaceful, the wrinkles smoothed by death. For a brief moment, the pain and the resentment melted away. I saw the man who had bought me toy cars, who had hugged me tightly at my mother's funeral. I reached out to touch his hand, to say a final goodbye. But before my fingers could reach him, Vivian was there, her hand on my arm, her touch cold and firm. "I think you've seen enough," she whispered, her voice like ice. "The grieving is for family, the real family." She gave a subtle nod to Chloe and Elias, who watched with smug satisfaction. "You didn't see him for nearly 2 decades. You don't get to say goodbye now." My heart, already raw, felt like it was being ripped apart. I looked at her, then back, at my father's face, and I simply nodded. I turned and walked out of the church without a word, silent promise to myself that this wasn't over. A week later, The lawyer's office was a picture of solemnity. The scent of old paper and leather filled the room. Vivian sat across from me, flanked by Chloe and Elias, who had a look of arrogant ownership on their faces. They were dressed in expensive suits, their hair meticulously styled. I, on the other hand, was in a simple black suit, my face calm and impassive. My quiet confidence seemed to irk them. The lawyer, a man named Mr. Henderson, cleared his throat. "Good morning," he said. "We are here for the reading of Mr. James Carter's last will and testament." Vivian leaned forward, a barely perceptible smirk playing on her lips. I knew what she was expecting. She expected the will to name her and her children as the primary heirs. With a small token for me, if anything, Mr. Henderson began to read. He read about the properties, the shares in Carter Enterprises, the various assets. He spoke of the beloved wife, Vivian, and the children, Chloe and Elias. As he read their names, Vivian's smirk widened, and Elias shot me a triumphant, gloating look. Then came the end of the document. To my estranged son, Lucian Carter, I leave a trust fund of $100,000, as was my intention. The amount was a slap in the face, a pittance. Vivian couldn't contain her satisfaction. She let out a small, quiet laugh. I remained still, my face a blank slate. Mr. Henderson put the document down on the table. "This is the current will, dated 15 years ago, a year before your departure, Mr. Carter." He looked at me, a hint of pity in his eyes. Vivian finally spoke, her voice dripping with venomous sweetness. "Well, Lucian, it seems Daddy didn't forget you after all. Little something to help you start over. Now, if you don't mind, this is a private meeting for the heirs." She motioned for me to leave, her smirk a cruel, victorious masterpiece. Chloe and Elias watched me with undisguised contempt. I said nothing. I just reached into the leather briefcase I had placed on the floor beside my chair. The others watched, confused. I wasn't leaving. I pulled out a plain brown file folder, thin and unmarked. I quietly handed it to Mr. Henderson. He looked at me, then at Vivian, then back at the file, puzzled. "What is this?" he asked, his voice low. "Please," I said. My voice calm, "just open it." Mr. Henderson hesitated for a moment, then untied the string of the folder and opened it. He pulled out the documents inside. On top was a single sheet of paper. His eyes widened slightly as he read the title. He flipped to the next page and saw the signatures. Then he looked up at me, a look of profound shock on his face. Vivian, sensing something was wrong, snapped, "What is it, George?" "What's in there?" Mr. Henderson's hands trembled slightly as he held the paper. This is a new will," he stammered, his eyes fixed on the final page. "It's dated just 2 months ago. It's been notarized and witnessed, it seems, but to supersede the previous one." Vivian's smirk vanished. A look of sheer panic replaced it. "What? That's impossible?" she shrieked. "James wasn't well. He couldn't have. ... Mr. Henderson ignored her, his eyes scanning the new document. "The terms are ... clear. The entire estate, including all assets, properties, and Carter Enterprises, are bequeathed to Lucian. Carter," he paused, flipping a page, "and there's a trust, a substantial one, set up for his mother's paper cranes, the clause that it be used for the benefit of neglected children." The blood drained from Vivian's face. Chloe and Elias's smug expressions contorted into disbelief. Vivian stammered, "No, he was a sick man. He was under duress. I will contest this. He couldn't have done this." Mr. Henderson held up a hand. "There's more, Mrs. Carter. The second document here is a power of attorney, also newly signed. Lucian Carter, the authority to investigate the company's financial records. And attached to that are detailed records of fund transfers to a number of offshore accounts under your name and your children's." That was the final blow. Vivian's face turned completely pale. Her eyes darted from the lawyer to me, a wild, desperate look. The carefully constructed facade of her life was crumbling. I had nothing to say to her. The look on her face said everything I needed to know. The man who had been a ghost to me for so long had seen her all along, had known the pain she had caused me, and in his final moments, he had found a way to make it right, had given me my vindication and a future where I was no longer defined by her. He had given me a final, unspoken goodbye that was more meaningful than any words at a casket. I stood up, picked up my briefcase, and turned to leave. Vivian tried to speak, but only a choked sob escaped her lips. As I reached the door, I looked. Back at the cold, silent room, at the wreckage of their lives. I didn't feel triumph, only a quiet, heavy sense of peace. Ghost of Franklin could finally be laid to rest. The paper crane in my pocket felt lighter than it ever had before,